Is this a real breakthrough or just a temporary pause before the next escalation? Well, joining me in studio to discuss more, international affairs analyst Dan Perry, as well as our I24 News senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran.
We're working with people to try to get through some of these things, but it's really fundamentally we're on the right track. We got a lot more to do. We got a lot more that the Iranians are going to have to accept as part of this negotiation, but I think we've got a strong hand and we're going to play it well.
A lot of optimism coming there from the U.S. Vice President. Dan, I want your take, because that optimism is not necessarily being felt here in Israel. In fact, there's a lot of skepticism regarding any of the potentials of where a ceasefire could actually leave the regime.
The thing about Israel is that Israelis had been led to believe that they can accomplish more in this war than what some of the military officers call mowing the grass, meaning degrading Iran's capabilities. A year ago, or 10 months ago, they were very satisfied with degrading Iran's capabilities. No one had any illusions that you can bring down a regime merely with air power without having organized something on the ground. No one really had any illusions that you can take fanatical jihadists who are potentially suicidal and compel them to agree publicly to stop misbehaving. The problem is that the expectations had been raised that one of these two things might happen now. And of course, they did not. And so everyone's disappointed in Israel because it looks like all that has happened is a significant degrading of Iran's military infrastructure, probably a setting back even of their proxy network, and obviously the killing of not only the supreme leader, but an astounding array of senior military and political officials. Now, you could certainly present that as something that rational people, not clear that means the Iranian regime, but that rational people should, take as a lesson for the future. And if that had been Israel's ambition and America's ambition, then you could say the war was not illogical. But now everyone, of course, is disappointed. And everyone was expecting the Iranians to accept the 15-point American plan, which they're obviously not going to do. And as you look at this conundrum, with everyone pretending that Khalibaf doesn't understand English and that it's all so complicated that there's a few misunderstandings, I think more likely to be the case is that everyone's looking for something elegant and they can spin. So, for example, the one thing I imagine is achievable in negotiations is a deal on a nuclear file. How could you do that? Iran insists it has the right to enrich, and Trump says they're never going to enrich. Oh my God, total loggerheads. Not really, because there is no reason not to allow Iran to enrich at a civilian level. They have the right, as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to enrich at 3.5%, which endangers no one. And you cannot make a bomb from that. And they have been claiming in the past that they don't want a nuclear weapon, but had been enriching at 60% or more. So they were lying. The obvious solution here is for Trump to agree to 3.5%, because his claim that they can't enrich at all really never had a leg to stand on legally. The world has other horrible regimes that they have the right to enrich for energy purposes, for research purposes. And that could be an elegant solution. For example, on the missiles, they're never going to agree to no longer build missiles, but Israel's degraded, the army says, eliminated the vast majority of their launchers. And on Hezbollah and the proxies, right now Hezbollah is not getting Iranian weapons. If Hezbollah really is encircled by the Syrians to the east and by the hostile Lebanese government to the west and Israelis to the south, and who knows who else might pile on top of Hezbollah in that war, conceivably Israel can emerge with some advantage there as well. The problem in Israel is that they expected too much because a highly hubristic prime minister allowed them to think these things were achievable.
And the fact that these talks are happening in the first place, from a deterrence standpoint, what message does this send to Iran?
Trump's insistence from the beginning that the war is limited in time, I think, sent a message to the Iranian regime that as long as they survive that time span, then they can avoid the main thing that they know Israel and the U.S. wants, which is the victory attached to regime change. It's as simple as that. I suspect right now the Iranian regime thinks that Trump is extremely disinterested in resuming the war. And that they may think that applies to Israel as well, in which case they'd be wrong. But with America, it might be so. The war is so unpopular in the U.S., and Trump's approval ratings are extremely low right now, and he has midterms coming up. And the Republican Party is divided on this. Interestingly, in the polls, the MAGA base less so. Most of MAGA seem to go along with the war, but senior people in the MAGA movement just hated it. And right now, there's a bit of a blame game even happening as to who bamboozled Trump and whether Bibi showed up with ridiculous presentations and videos suggesting Reza Pahlavi would immediately be able to fly in and take over the government. There's a problem that's political for Trump. And also, of course, the fact that the NATO nations refused to join, which has created a big problem, which caused Trump to overreact and to suggest he wants to leave NATO, which would be a real catastrophe for global security. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, had to fly to the U.S. today to try to fix this problem, which he'll probably do with more fawning over Trump. He's already called him daddy one time. It's all just extremely ugly. Throw in the global economy and the assessments by senior economists that the disruption is not just oil spiking and then going down, but the loss of trust that could create a shift in a global economy. And we could, if Iran is allowed to get away with this talk about piracy, whereby they blackmail ships to pass through, you could start hearing about other straits in the world becoming toll booths, including, of course, with the Yemenis and the Bab el-Mandeb. It is an ugly situation. And the Iranians see this. They have succeeded in using asymmetric power, because militarily they were thrashed. But using asymmetric means like $20,000 drones, they have been able to cause all this difficulty, and they survived Trump's time span. He wasn't lying. He ended the war after 6 weeks, as he said in the beginning, and he probably doesn't want to resume it. So what can you get out of these negotiations? Hopefully, they're going to put their foot down on the piracy in the Persian Gulf. Iran can't be charging tolls and bounties for boats. I have to think that is there for negotiating tactics or whatever. And the other thing is, as I said before, they can probably get something on the nukes as long as they do allow Iran to enrich at a civilian level, which is harmless and which is their right. Then everyone will claim victory, and you'll be left with a degradation of the regime.
Do you have something to add to what Edmund was just sharing?
Well, yeah, the world, he's a former UK ambassador. The UK refused to join the war just because Iran had blocked the Strait of Hormuz. The world kind of understood that Iran did this illegal thing because they're under attack, and when you're under attack, you might behave badly. If Iran has concluded that they can go ahead and do piracy in the Strait of Hormuz, I would expect at that point, when they're no longer under attack and this is what they're doing, for the entire world to rise up against them. And I would wonder if he would agree that at that point, the UK would find itself indeed in a position of conflict with Iran, as would NATO, the European Union, the Arab League, and all of Asia.
Well, we certainly haven't seen that the case so far, but questions remain when it comes to this ceasefire. Dan, it's reassuring to hear from different U.S. leaders that Iran and Hezbollah are not the same front. These are two separate fronts. But as we do head into these negotiations in Pakistan over the weekend, how likely is it that the negotiators, Iran, Pakistan as mediators, can try and morph these fronts? Is that something that the United States might be willing to give a little bit of leeway on?
It's conceivable, and I can only hope that not. I mean, I have to admit that about a month ago, I was among many who were thinking that surrender terms can be imposed on Iran, and they can be made to, in exchange for an end to the war, because they were being battered so badly, made to promise that they would stop supporting Hezbollah. It seems very likely to me that at this point, given that they survived for as long as they have, the American demands will be limited to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and to an arrangement on the nukes. So Israel's a little bit on its own with these militias. It may be difficult for Iran to practically get aid to them now, but the Hezbollah situation should be distinct from Iran because it predates the Iran war. It predates the first Iran war 10 months ago. Israel has concluded, and this is a case where the government of Israel, that's very much controversial in Israel itself, is aligned with the Israeli public. The Israelis have concluded they can no longer tolerate Hezbollah attacking them at whim from Lebanon. And the interesting thing is, so has the Lebanese government. Now, the Lebanese government, a year and a half ago, promised to disarm Hezbollah. And the understanding was, after the campaign of the fall of 2024, that Hezbollah would cease to be a militia operating in Lebanon. And that hasn't happened. And I don't think it's because Lebanon's trying to trick anyone. They're simply too weak and they need assistance. And the Israeli operation in Lebanon now, and I can only hope they're being very careful not to not to throw away the support they have among many Lebanese by causing too much civilian damage in Lebanon. The operation in Lebanon right now should be directed against Hezbollah, and it should continue until Hezbollah is degraded to the point where they cease firing on Israel and engage the Lebanese government in a disarming process. I suspect that the Lebanese government will need help in this regard, and I've been arguing now for months that the world should get involved, and that can include the Arab League, Arab militaries, even Syria, which many Israelis would disagree with me on, and possibly NATO.
The Trump administration is considering a plan to punish some members of the NATO alliance that he believes were unhelpful to the U.S. and Israel during the Iran war, according to a new report by the Wall Street Journal. The proposal would involve moving U.S. troops out of those NATO member states and station them in countries more supportive of the U.S. military campaign. Back here in studio, Dan, this is a new report from the Wall Street Journal, but in line with the cracks and the tensions that we continue to see between the U.S. president and NATO. If there is some truth to this report, what would this mean in reality for this alliance?
It may not mean very much at all, because the U.S. is within its rights to move troops to whatever, between countries to whatever countries want to be hospitable. And it has no obligation to have troops in particular NATO countries. I don't see them moving troops out of Germany or out of Romania or frontline countries in the Ukraine war, for example. It's not unreasonable because NATO, those countries really were unhelpful during the war. Now, I would distinguish between that and NATO. NATO is not the sum total of the actions of all its members. NATO is NATO. And I think Trump misunderstands NATO's Article 5. Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. It doesn't say if any one of us chooses to attack a third party, then we all have to pile on. For Trump to have expected that automatically was immature. And Trump in general has been disdaining NATO for a long, long time. He either misunderstands or misrepresents the NATO budget. NATO budget, which he says America pays all of, is only about $4 to $5 billion, of which America pays 1/6 of. America has the biggest military in the world, independent of NATO, and that's a little sleight of hand when they talk about how the U.S. pays more than other NATO members. It has a way bigger army because it wants to control from the Monroe Doctrine onward, it wants to control the Americas. NATO is a very good deal for America. It allows America to project power all over the European theater and beyond. It allows America to basically lead the free world, and it is the backbone of the defense of democracies that has kept the peace since World War II. So Trump's war on NATO was extremely, extremely misguided. Trump's displeasure with certain countries that tried to block their airspace to the U.S. during the war is highly understandable and independent of his foolish discussions about potentially pulling the U.S. out of NATO, which would be a catastrophe.
Let's also talk about politically here at home, what this means for the prime minister as it stands right now.
Well, Israelis have been put through a month and a half of great difficulty, and several score were killed. And the prime minister led them to believe that the result is going to be an end to the threat from Iran, and this was probably never realistic, and it hasn't happened. So, of course, it's looking like a political failure. The reasons why Netanyahu is unpopular at this point, polls show he would lose the election if held today, even after this war, are manifold and have to do with his effort to install an authoritarian regime in Israel, have to do with the inability to remove Hamas from Gaza, have to do with the spectacular breakdown on October 7th, and on and on. So Netanyahu is headed towards difficulty in the next couple of months in the campaign.
I want to thank you both for being with me here in studio. To our viewers, we will be back on air tomorrow.